Hello YouTube, it's Bloom here from counterpointlife.com, and today we're looking at how to add that filmic look to your videos or content. Now you may have seen that there's a bunch of clips and tutorials on this topic already, but most assume that you have access to some pretty expensive software or gear. So what if we want to try out some of this stuff without spending the big bucks, say on your phone or your compact camera using free software? Can we get a similar result? Stick around and I'll show you how. So the first thing that I want to say about this video is the key thing we're going to do here is create a film look. It's unlikely that what you pick up in a YouTube clip and shoot on your phone is going to replace what you could get from a real film camera, or more importantly replace the combined experience of the professionals on a set and the thousands of hours that they put into every commercial release you see. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to up your game or have a bit of fun mucking about editing footage that you've taken on your phone or DSLR. Now the things that we're looking to replicate in our film look depend on what you're aspiring to mimic or reference. The film look of The Godfather 2 is very different from the film look of the Blair Witch Project or again the Hobbit films, but each was successful in their own way. Generally though, it's the things that you see used a lot, like an anamorphic format, black and white or colour with a high dynamic range, colour correction, grading, film grain, a shallow depth of field, the type of camera movement used, if any, and a frame rate of 24 frames per second with the shutter set at 1/48th or 1/50th of a second. So first let's look at how to set up our camera to capture the flattest image that we can. And the reason that we want to do this is to give ourselves the most flexibility when working with the footage later. The other thing that will help here is a tripod. So set your device to the mode that gives you the highest resolution and the most options, or lets you keep settings the way that you want. Set your white balance manually to reflect the scene that you're filming. Set your exposure value compensation so that your device captures the most detail in the shadows without blowing out the sky, etc. And I generally find that slightly underexposing a shot gives better results on a phone or a small camera. If you're using a DSLR, you'll have more options in the full manual mode. First, set your frame rate to 24p and your shutter to 1/50th of a second. Then, set your color profile to natural and turn down the sharpness, noise reduction, and contrast and saturation, or use a cine profile if your camera has one. Set your ISO to the lowest possible setting for the aperture that you're using to correctly expose your shot while still avoiding any noise. Then finally set your white balance to reflect the color of your scene. Now if you haven't already, head over to blender.org and follow the instructions to download the correct version of Blender for your system. Once you've installed it and opened it, you'll get a screen that looks something like this. Blender is primarily a 3D modeling software, which is kind of how we'll be using it. But it also has a great video sequence editor, which I'll show you. So change from the default view in this menu down to video editing, and then get your windows organized. With the cursor over the channel strip editor down here, press Shift A to add a clip. Now I'm just going to use some test footage and zoom in with the middle mouse wheel. Over here on the right are all the things that we can edit with this clip selected. I'm going to add a curves modifier at the bottom to add some contrast and color grading. Just going to put a slight S curve here on the master tab. And just going to make it so that we can see it. And then tweak the red, green, and blue like so. Now we're going to add another movie clip, this time some film grain. And we're going to set the blend mode to overdrop and bring the opacity slider down to almost 0 so we can see it. Next, for the vignette and the letterbox overlays, which are transparent images, I'm going to add those one by one, change the blending mode of the vignette to alpha over, so that we can see through to the strips below, and adjust the opacity again. And we're just going to use the right mouse button to drag the end of this out to match our footage. And we'll do the same for the letterbox overlay. Just drag it out with the right mouse button and left click to lock it in place, and we'll press play. This is a quick and easy way to get things done, but you do need to have the transparent overlays, and you can make them pretty easily in Photoshop or GIMP, or you can get them for free from a bunch of places, including my site. Just go to the Film Resources section and take whatever you need. Now, the video editor in Blender is good for previewing work or compiling and editing multiple clips or adding sound and basic effects and color correction and all that. But the range of effects is limited compared to what the compositor can do. And this means that that's where we're heading to create most of our effects. So I'm just going to delete all of that. Now, we're going to burn through this next process. So if you're new to Blender, can I suggest just watching through to see if it will do what you want? If you're following along with Blender open, just get ready to pause and rewind as much as you need to follow the instructions exactly. Alright, here we go. First thing we need to do is set up our scene in the default view. Press N to bring up the side menu and keep an eye out for the keys and shortcuts I'm using down here. If you've left clicked anywhere, you will have moved the 3D cursor, so just come over here and reset it to 0, 0, 0. Then using the right mouse button, select the cube and the light and press X to delete them. Then select our camera and move it into position using Alt-G and Alt-R. Left click on the blue arrow to drag it up a little bit, then press Shift-A to add images as planes. And I'm going to use the same test footage we used before. Select the grey plane and come over here to the Materials tab, and under the Shading, check the Shadeless box. Then go to the Texture tab and scroll down to click the Match Movie Length button so that we can use all of the frames of our footage. Now you'll also need to add the total number of your frames to the end section of the timeline and make sure that you're at the beginning. Now, we still can't see our footage. I'll just zoom in with the mouse wheel here. So what we need to do is go just above the timeline and change from a solid view to the material using this menu, then press 0 on the number pad or use the view menu to see what your camera sees. Check the lock camera view box to zoom the camera with the mouse wheel. Then under the render tab, we're going to use the full resolution and we're going to make it more anamorphic by changing the render output to 1920 by 816. And this will automatically give us the black bars at top and bottom. Now you just need to frame up your footage by zooming the camera in or moving it around or moving the footage around. With my camera selected, I'm just going to fine tune the zoom a bit here and then select the footage and drag it down a little bit. Something like that, and then we're ready to start adding our effects. So let's go up to the compositor. And we're going to get rid of the 3D view at the moment and check the Use Nodes box. Alright, so far we have two nodes, our scene and the composite image that gets rendered. And you can connect or disconnect these nodes by left-clicking on this little patch cable. Alright, press F12 to render what we have so far. Then just use the mouse wheel down here just to zoom out a little bit. And press T to bring up the image tools or scopes that we're going to use to help color correct our footage. Now these are the same that you would find in other editing programs, and how to use them is a whole topic on its own, but we'll cover the basics. We've got a vector scope for color, we've got a waveform monitor and a histogram. Now use Shift A up in the compositor to add a node and select color balance and click it in place. Starting with black level, we're going to add a little bit of contrast to our image by dragging down on the lift slider. Just going to zoom in here. And we can use the histogram or the waveform monitor to help us get our shadows as close to black or zero as possible without going over. And you can see here how the waveform monitor corresponds to our footage. Alright, in the same way, we're going to bring up our highlights using the gain slider so that our white fence is as close to white or 100 as possible without going over and losing detail. And I'm just going to bring down the mids a touch. Now, with the color balance node still selected, I can press M to mute it and check the result against the original. And we're going to use the vector scope to work with color. Now you can see that the scope, the color spread is quite uneven, and that's okay, except that most of my shot features a building with grey concrete render, which currently looks like sandstone. So we'd expect to see a bit more of an even spread in the center with some spikes coming up. The histogram shows us that there's a lot of blue in the lower mids and shadows, and a lot of green and red in the highlights, so that's where we're going to start trying to balance our image by moving in the opposite direction. So if I grab this color wheel for the highlights, you'll see that we can use this to influence our image a lot. And next I'll do the same for the shadows and the midtones. And we're only doing very small adjustments here just to try to get rid of the red tint of the original footage, which didn't quite capture the color of the scene on the day. Alright, next we're going to add 3 groups of nodes to create a sharpen, film grain and vignette effect. Now it's going to look like a dog's breakfast when we're finished, but just follow along and use the settings that I use as a starting point for your own video. We'll start off by adding a filter blur node, then a color mix node connected like so. And we're going to change the blur node to 7x7. And the mix factor to something larger than 1. Alright, and connect it like that. Then add another color mix node and set it to overlay with a low factor with something like 0.11. Now, for the film grain, we're going to create it in using an input texture node and a filter node inside of Blender. Connect it like this. So we just need something to apply our texture to. Drag open the 3D view and make sure that you have the image plane selected. And go over to the texture tab. And we're going to click on the texture button. And we're going to add a new one and set the type to noise. Now when we go back to our texture node, we'll be able to select it from the available textures. There it is. For our vignette, we'll use a converter node set to math, greater than, and a distort node set to lens distort. I'm going to add a filter node set to blur using fast Gaussian. Setting them about 20%, use the relative. And finally a converter node RGB to black and white. Then we're going to use a color mix node to multiply, or set it to multiply to mix all this together. So we've got our 3 basic effects, but you can imagine the possibilities with the thousands of different combinations of nodes and connections and stuff. So start playing around with some settings until you get something that you're happy with. Alright, drag open the bottom window here. And I forgot to change that to multiply. So there we go. Remember how we turned down the sharpness on the camera? Well, we can add it now with a lot more control if you need it by just changing this value here. I'm just going to hold down Shift and select both of these nodes and press M to turn them off because I actually don't want it. And we can change how much grain we see by using the factor slider here, because it's mixing with the other image. Generally, you want to keep it quite subtle. Alright, and the same thing for our vignette. We're going to connect the output of the previous node, like this. And then we can change the strength of the effect with this value down here. And you could also swap out the RGB to black and white node for a color balance and colorize it too if you wanted. But again, I don't really want that for this shot, so I'm going to mute them. Okay, so the last thing that we can do for our film look is use Blender's color management presets under the Scene tab. Let's come over here to the Scene tab and set the view to film. And check the use curves to give yourself greater control in addition to the exposure and the gamma sliders. Alright, then choose a look from the list that best suits what you need. Now you'll probably recognize some names here because they're actually emulations of real photographic film, and they offer some pretty interesting results, and a great starting point for your color grading. And these can also be added if you're using the video editor like I showed you at the start, but they do apply to the color of the whole scene. So if you're using a transparent letterbox overlay, your black bars will also change color, as will any text that you add. So that's why we went the long way around and set up our 3D scene and used the compositor for our effects. Now to preview your work, just come up to the video editor and add a scene strip. With your mouse over the view area, press N and uncheck the OpenGL preview. Zoom out a bit using the scroll wheel and press play to preview everything together. Depending on your system, you may need to use a proxy render size to speed things up. Now, if you don't want to use one of the presets, go back to the compositor view and you'll need to turn everything under the scene tab back to default. And instead, directly after your first color balance node, add as many color RGB curves nodes as you like. And then you can use this to grade your footage the way that you want it. And we'll just quickly do something similar to what we did before. Alright, when you've finished your composition, go over to the Render tab, and we're going to check that your resolution is correct, and that your start and end frames plus your frame rate match your original footage. Set your output folder and change your format from PNG sequence to a video format if that's what you need. I'm going to use Xvid with encoding set to H.264 and a target bit rate of 30 megabits. Finally, change the display to Keep UI to save resources during render. Go back to the default view and click the animation button when you're ready to go. That's it.